the first part of this module, we will know about the respiratory system of mammals and its function, that is respiration. Respiration is a chemical process by which animals exchange the respiratory gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide with their environment by the help of specialized structures such as lungs or gills and the release of energy within the cell. Every cell requires oxygen to perform cellular respiration, which gives off carbon dioxide and water as waste products. In the simplest form of animals like amoeba, euglena, poriferans and hydrants, exchange of gases takes place through the general body surface between the body protoplasm and the water. Worms respire through their moist skin, hence called cutaneous respiration. In insects, some arachnids and centipedes, the exchange of respiratory gases occurs through a spatial system of fine canals called the tracheal system. In aquatic animals such as prawns, fishes, tadpoles of toad, gaseous exchange take place by the gills. Most amphibians, reptiles, birds and mammals respire by means of lungs. Frogs and toads also respire by means of their skin. Mammals and some other vertebrates have lungs to exchange the air. However, the lungs are ventilated differently in different group of vertebrates. The human respiratory system consists of a pair of lungs and a series of air passages leading to the lungs. The entire respiratory tract consists of the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi and bronchioles that are involved with moving air in and out of the lungs. The entire respiratory tract is lined by ciliated epithelium and mucous membrane, which help in trapping the dust, dirt, viral particles and bacteria that can damage the lungs. Nose. The nose consists of two nostrils and nasal passages separated by cartilaginous septum. Pharynx. It is located behind the nasal cavities and buccal cavities. Larynx, also called the Adam's apple or voice box, is situated at the top of the trachea. Trachea. It is about 11 cm long, containing soft tissue surrounded by 16 to 20 C-shaped rings of cartilage, which prevent the trachea from collapsing. The trachea divides into two tubes called bronchi that lead to each lung. The epiglottis prevents the food from entering into the respiratory tract. Bronchi. The end of the trachea bifurcates to the right and left at the level of 4th or 5th thoracic vertebrae. The bronchi are made of cartilage and smooth muscles. Bronchi are innervated by nerves of both the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems that control muscle contraction or relaxation respectively. Bronchioles. The bronchi subdivide in the lungs into smaller branches known as bronchioles, having a diameter smaller than 0.5 mm and rely on inhaled air to support their shape. Each bronchiole ends in alveolar ducts which are connected with many tiny air sacs called alveolus. The bronchioles are made up of smooth and muscle elastic fibers. Alveoli. These are extremely thin-walled, grape-shaped air sacs made up of squamous cells. The alveoli increase the surface area 100 times more for gas exchange. This allows sufficient oxygen intake that is required for releasing energy. There are about 350 million alveoli in each human lung, covering a total area of 100 square meter. Each alveolar duct ends in approximately 100 alveolar sacs. Each sac contains 20 to 30 alveoli that are 200 to 300 microns in diameter. Alveoli are surrounded by a network of thin-walled web of capillaries. Special cells are present in the alveoli which secrete a substance called surfactant. This reduces the surface tension of water, thereby keeping the alveoli moist and from sticking to each other when the person exhales. Lungs. It is the chief organ in mammalian respiration. They are large, lobed, paired, spongy organs in the chest cavity. In humans, the right lung has 3 lobes and left lung has 2. 2 layers of thin sheets of epithelium or pleura separate the inside of the chest cavity from the outer surface of the lungs. The outer layer is called parietal pleura and inner layer is called visceral pleura. Between the 2 layers there is a space called pleural space. The bottom of the thoracic cavity is formed by the diaphragm. The lungs are actively ventilated via a suction pump mechanism of inhalation and exhalation. There are many muscles involved in the process of respiration, namely intercostal muscles. These consists of 2 layers of short muscle fibers which extend between the edges of adjoining ribs, the external running downwards and backwards, the internal running downwards and forwards, the former serving to raise the ribs. Diaphragm. It is a dome-shaped muscular arc or midriff structure located just beneath the lungs like floor or roof separating the abdomen from the thoracic cavity. Its posterior concave surface is covered with the peritoneum of the belly. The anterior convex surface is covered with the pleura of the chest and is in contact with the lungs. The diaphragm is the most powerful muscle of inspiration. During the act of contraction, the arc naturally falls back and tends to become a plane surface, and thus the cavity of the chest is enlarged from before. Abdominal muscles. They relax and constrict to increase the volume of the abdominal cavity when the diaphragm moves. According to the noted scientist G. S. Carter, the respiration can be divided into following 3 stages. 1. External respiration or breathing, which involves the gaseous exchange between the blood and the air with the help of different respiratory organs. I will discuss on this little later in this module. Transport of respiratory gases involves the transportation of oxygen from the respiratory surface to the tissues or cells and carbon dioxide from the cells to the respiratory surface for expulsion. I will discuss on this point in the second part of this module. Third, internal or tissue respiration involves utilization of oxygen in cells for oxidation of foodstuffs to release energy and elimination of carbon dioxide from tissues. Such cellular respiration is the chemical reaction in which organic molecules are broken down by oxidation of foodstuffs to produce ATP molecules. The main energy source for the metabolism and eliminate carbon dioxide from tissues. Depending on the availability of oxygen, such respiration may be of two types. 1. Aerobic respiration. It occurs when complete oxidation of carbohydrates takes place in presence of oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide and water. Such type of respiration occurs in higher organisms like plants as well as animals such as mammals, aves, fishes, etc. In animals, the muscles need oxygen and glucose to respire aerobically and produce the energy they require. These are carried to the muscle via the blood. Glucose, upon oxidation with 6 molecules of oxygen, produces 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, water and about 2800 kilojoules of energy. At the same time, it releases 38 ATP molecules. Second, anaerobic respiration. It occurs when incomplete oxidation of carbohydrates takes place in absence of oxygen, releasing alcohol or lactic acid and carbon dioxide. It occurs in plants, microbes and animals. In this case, glucose molecule upon oxidation with 6 molecules of oxygen produces ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide and 210 kilojoules of energy, that is around 2 ATP molecules. In animals, during vigorous exercise, heart and lungs are not able to get sufficient oxygen to our muscles in order to respire. In such situation, muscles carry out anaerobic respiration. In this case, glucose produces lactic acid upon oxidation and releases 120 kilojoules of energy per mole. Anaerobic respiration is not as efficient as aerobic, as only a small amount of energy is released because of partial breakdown of glucose. Moreover, the production of lactic acid, if increases in the body, then it stops the muscles from working and causes a cramp. In plants, if the oxygen supply runs out, as in case of waterlogging in the soil, they obtain their energy via anaerobic respiration. Plants cannot keep up the anaerobic respiration process for long time. The parts of the plant using this type of respiration eventually die. However, germinating seeds planted underground and certain species of fungi can use anaerobic respiration for a long duration. In this case, glucose produces ethanol and carbon dioxide upon oxidation, releasing energy. When the above reaction occurs in yeast cell, it is referred to as fermentation. This process is used for baking bread and brewing alcohol. Ventilation or breathing is the simple mechanics of breathing in and out. There are two main steps in breathing: inspiration and expiration. Inspiration or inhalation is the process of breathing in air and is brought into the lungs. During inspiration, the muscles attached to the ribs on their outer side contract. This causes the ribs to be pulled out, expanding the chest cavity. The diaphragm contracts and moves downwards to further expand the chest cavity. The abdominal muscles contract this expansion of the chest cavity and creates a partial vacuum in the chest region. This reduced air pressure in the lungs causes the air to enter the respiratory tract to equalize the pressure and fill the expanded alveoli. Hence, inspiration is effected. Expiration. After the exchange of gases in the lungs, the air has to be expelled. This is called expiration or exhalation. In this process, the muscles attached to the ribs on their inner side contract and the diaphragm and the abdominal muscles relax. The diaphragm becomes more arched, the abdominal and chest and lungs retract by virtue of their elasticity and expiration results. This leads to a decrease in the volume of the chest cavity, which increases the pressure on the lungs. The air in the lungs is pushed out and is passed out through the nose. When we breathe out, not all of the air in the lungs get expelled. Some of it remains in the lungs, which keep the lungs from collapsing and allows more time for the exchange of gases. In the process of respiration or breathing, air first passes into the nostrils, where it is filtered by the nasal hairs and warmed and humidified in the nasal cavity and sinuses. Most dust, microbes, bacteria, etc. are filtered from the inhaled air. From there, the air passes through the pharynx, larynx, trachea and then into the bronchi. Each bronchus divides into the secondary and then into tertiary bronchi, which further divide to create small diameter bronchioles that split and spread through the lungs. From the bronchi, air enters the bronchioles. As the passageways decrease in diameter, the relative amount of smooth muscles increases. The terminal bronchioles then subdivide into respiratory bronchioles, which subdivide into alveolar ducts. The alveolar ducts branches and terminates into alveolus. The alveoli are surrounded by capillary network from pulmonary veins carrying oxygenated blood from lungs and pulmonary arteries carrying deoxygenated blood to the lungs for diffusion. The exchange of gases takes place because of the differences in their partial pressures. The partial pressure of oxygen is lower in the deoxygenated blood, about 46 mm mercury, and is carried by the pulmonary arteries. It is high in the alveoli, about 98 mm mercury. The partial pressure of carbon dioxide is always higher in the deoxygenated blood, about 46 mm mercury, carried by the pulmonary arteries, but low in the alveolar air, around 40 mm mercury. Because of these differences, gases are exchanged, oxygen enters the blood and carbon dioxide passes in reverse direction. The absorbed oxygen combines with respiratory pigments like hemoglobin, which increases the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood around 70 times. This oxyhemoglobin dissociates in the tissue cells to release the oxygen. Carbon dioxide concentration in metabolically active cells is much greater, about 40 mm mercury, than in venous blood capillaries, about 40 mm mercury, produced as a waste product by cells. So, carbon dioxide diffuses from the cells into the capillaries. The carbon dioxide from this blood diffuses into alveoli and out of the body during the next exhalation step. These gases are transported to and from lungs and cells in various forms, which we shall discuss in our second part. When the blood reaches the systemic capillaries near the cells, the carbon dioxide and oxygen diffuse in opposite directions. After circulating through the heart, the blood arrives at the capillaries near the lungs. Water vapor and carbon dioxide are exhaled, and the process begins again with inhalation. The normal respiratory rate in an adult man is about 15 to 20 per minute, but the rate is influenced by certain factors like rise of the body temperature, rise of carbon dioxide in the blood and lack of oxygen in the air. The air that is used in respiration has been divided into 4 portions. First, there is that portion of air taken in during quiet or normal breathing called tidal air, which may be estimated to be about 500 ml. Second, tidal volume is the amount of air breathed in or out during a respiratory cycle. The tidal volume and respiratory frequency varies amongst species and can also be affected by age, pregnancy, exercise, excitement, temperature and body size. But during exertion, the animal can take in an additional amount of air over and above what it inspires in ordinary breathing. This is termed as complemental air. Under these circumstances also, we give out air during expiration, much more air than when expiration has been made during rest. That extra quantity is named supplemental air. And these 3 portions, that is tidal, complemental and supplemental, are collectively called vital capacity. It is the maximum volume that can be exhaled during forced breathing. For young adult humans, this amount is around 4 to 5 liters of air, and the average for female is slightly lower. In young and strong animals with free movement of the chest walls, the vital capacity is large. In old and weakly animals, when the cartilage of the ribs are ossified and the lungs and thorax are less elastic, it is small. Finally, there is a portion of air termed the residual air, which cannot be dislodged even by the deepest expiration. Muscular contraction and relaxation controls the rate of expansion and constriction of the lungs. These muscles are stimulated by nerves that carry messages from the part of the brain that controls breathing, which is called medulla and pons. They decide how fast respiration needs to take place by monitoring the level of carbon dioxide in the blood. When the cells require more oxygen than normal in times of excitement or exercise, respiration speeds up. 2 systems control breathing, one an autonomic response and second a voluntary response. The condition of the airways and the pressure differences between the lungs and atmosphere are important factors in the flow of air in and out of lungs. Many diseases affect the condition of the airways, namely asthma, which narrows the airways by causing allergy-induced spasms of surrounding muscles or by clogging the airways with mucus. Bronchitis, it is an inflammatory response that reduces airflow and is caused by long-term exposure to irritants such as cigarette smoke, air, pollutants or allergens. Laryngitis, it is an inflammation of the larynx. Apnea involves stoppage of breathing for as long as 10 seconds. In some individuals, it is as often as 300 times per night due to failure in responding to elevated blood levels of carbon dioxide, resulting from viral infections of the brain or tumors. SIDS, that is sudden infant death syndrome. It is a malfunction of the breathing centers in newborns. In humans, tar and other substances in cigarette smoke destroy or paralyze the cilia, making the removal of particles more difficult. Smoking causes the lungs to produce more mucus, which the damaged cilia are unable to move. This causes a persistent cough as the lungs try to rid themselves of particulate matter, making the smokers more susceptible to respiratory ailments. Thus, respiration is a chemical process that takes place within the cell, resulting in the release of energy. During external respiration, gaseous exchange between the blood and air occurs. The oxygen, hence diffused in blood, is transported from the respiratory surface to the tissues, and carbon dioxide evolved in the tissues is carried to the respiratory surface for expulsion from the body. During internal respiration, the oxygen is utilized by the cells and energy is produced. Such process may be aerobic in higher animals or anaerobic in lower animals and plants. The respiration is an involuntary process regulated by nerves and chemicals.